Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to this session. We focus on common good. Common good is a notion at least since Aristotle. Some people say he was the man before Drucker who said it all. Came to confront us with this very notion that any system, any social group, any community has some overarching framework, call it common good, call it whatever, the notion of the good life. And only recently, corporations, the state, any organization re-entered a common good discourse. Not necessarily in an only Aristotelian sense, but in a broader sense that pluralistic societies need some overarching common framework. And to me, as a professor at a business school, common good is something also young people want to talk about social purpose. And in the world of new realities, this idea, this intellectual endeavor of talking about the common good needs some translation. And this is what this session will be about. Last year, in a similar context, we discussed why this is important to talk about social purpose and common good. This year, we want to talk about how this can be translated. And I hope, and I think, I pretend even, that Peter Drucker would have liked this session, because very early on, already starting in his work in The Future of Industrial Men, 1942, 46, and later his later works, he re-emphasized time and again what he called the social function of an institution. You cannot escape. He called managers or managements the organ of society. Whether they like it or not, they have impact, social impact. And in 1973, he came about to say, in contrast to Milton Friedman, the social responsibility is not maximizing profit only, not only, but, and Drucker never really opposed Friedman. He said, business has to justify its existence for society and legitimizes being good for society. And for a number of reasons I don't want to repeat here, we have this discussion, this debate, and even fueled, exacerbated maybe also by Larry Fink's letter earlier this year, the founder and CEO of largest asset manager, asset owner, the world, BlackRock, that corporations should develop a sense of purpose. They have to contribute, they should contribute, and taking off this normative flavor. This time, in this panel, we want to discuss how it gets done in reality. And to me, it's a great pleasure to welcome not only colleagues from Europe, but also from Asia, from Africa. And I promise in the next 60 minutes, we should have an inspiring discussion introduced by 4 initial statements, 6 to 7 minutes. My colleagues will kick it off. And afterwards, should have half an hour or so for dialogue. We deliberately decided not to use slides, but we should play with words. Not PowerPoint, karaoke, but real talk, because also Peter Drucker kept saying language is so important and language matters, and therefore we want to have the power of the word of mouth, not the power of pictures. Having said this, and let's welcome further participants, I'd like to have the first impulse provided by Gregor Jost. Short introduction, he's trained as a psychologist, international experience. He's partner at McKinsey, Vienna office, and he's deeply in organization matters, organizational design, organization development. And he will start our conversation with a picture, the landscape. What does McKinsey see across the globe in terms of our topic? Let's welcome Gregor Jost.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. Maybe first of all, telling a consultant not to use slides is, puts me in a kind of a difficult spot. I feel somewhat naked, but hopefully I'll rise to the challenge. I would start by agreeing with Timo that companies who spend time on purpose linked to the common good is something that we increasingly see. I do a lot of work in banking. For a recent client, we've looked at the vision and mission statements of a sample of banks 10 years ago and today, and you can sum it up by saying 10 years ago was all about performance and being the best bank in the world, and today it's all about contributing to society. Now, easy to be cynical about this because the financial crisis was in between and lots of the banks benefited from society helping them out, but it gives you a flavor of the trend. What I was going to do is to get us started a little bit is to talk about the why, the what, and the how of this question in sort of broad strokes, and then we can go further, I guess. My sense is the burden of proof on the why after a day and a half of this conference has been lowered. We see more and more companies engaging on this topic. There's multiple lines of reasoning around this. There's certainly a business line of reasoning. Customers want it, they're willing to pay for it, shareholders want it. We see more and more funds linking their investment goals to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals or principles of responsible investment. We see talent being attracted by it. Specifically, the younger cohorts that enter the job market now are heavily drawn and attracted and retained by companies that can provide a meaningful purpose and a meaning for the work. And we also see more and more companies moving out of the traditional line hierarchy, the line of command, the pyramid, into more modular forms of organizing, grouping people into teams, into team of teams, into small modular cells that are more autonomous, which means you have less direction and control from the top, and you need a stronger glue to hold this entire thing together, and purpose can provide that glue. That's the business rationale. There's certainly also a moral rationale behind it. More and more leaders in business adopting the idea that they have a moral responsibility to contribute to society, and we've heard various people in this forum talk about that as well. That's the why. The how I would structure probably from what we see in working on this at the coal face, if you will, in the trenches, is four evolutionary stages in there. I think that at the lowest rung of the ladder is probably, you have a corporate social responsibility department that institutionalizes this mission. You have people staffed to it. You have a budget. The next level is leveraging your own assets, I would say. For professional service firms, this is something like doing pro bono work for good causes. There are many other examples for this. The next level after that is to rethink the way you provide services and products to your customers, selecting very consciously who you provide these services and products for, and sort of reorienting the core of your business in accordance with your purpose. There are examples for that of companies starting or stopping to do things for certain customer groups. And then the last rung of the ladder, you could say, is you start becoming an advocate. You start talking at events like this one. You start talking to your network of peers. That is the what in very sort of broad strokes, and then I'll end with the how, which I think Timo is going to be keen to get into, with a few observations around this of sort of helping companies develop their purpose. I think the first observation here is to say purpose isn't created. It's something that is surfaced. It's certainly not something you hand over to consultants or to a public relations agency. It's something that is surfaced over a period of time, involving multiple stakeholders. In practice, that typically looks like many interviews, stories, narratives, focus groups, engagements over many months. It also involves a process of engaging the perspective of various different stakeholder groups. We often talk about different levels of meaning, because the purpose needs to mean something to shareholders, to customers, to different employee groups, to society at large, and they will all have a different read on this. And then the last observation I would share from doing this is to spend a lot of time, or at least we spend a lot of time, on translating the overarching purpose into a vision, a mission statement, a set of behaviors and ultimately into things that you can do as an employee on a Monday morning to make sure it's completely evident for everyone in the organization how their actions as an individual link to the greater purpose and ultimately to the common good.
Thank you, Gregor. I would have a number of questions, but I have to hesitate now and being the midwife, so to speak, and help others to succeed. And thank you. And after this big picture, and now I like to turn to my left and welcome Marie Ringler. She's a born Viennese.
Yes. Ask me for the places to go.
Yeah. She was the founder of Ashoka Austria. Now she is overseeing Ashoka Europe, responsible for 26 countries. And as many, I guess all of you know, Ashoka is the largest global platform to promote social entrepreneurship with 3,600 initiatives even. And I'm very proud to have you here, Marie, to tell us a little bit more about your perspective, how it is realized from an entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship viewpoint, and the floor is yours. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. So what are social entrepreneurs, right? In the world of Ashoka, the organization that basically came up with this word 40 years ago, in the world of Ashoka, social entrepreneurs are people who have an entrepreneurial mindset and are focused on solving a problem in our society. And for them, it's impact first. Now, what does that mean? Just let me give you a few examples of what that means. Social entrepreneurs are people who build and disrupt markets and systems. One of them, for example, is a woman called Ursula Sladek, who, from the mid-'80s onwards, was, in a way, the pioneer of renewable energy in Germany. She saw the need to change energy consumption and energy production and put it into the hands of citizens. And she was the first one who devised the idea of citizen-owned energy production. Now, this entire body of work has led to a huge renewable energy sector and thousands of citizens all across the world who own energy production, who own windmills, who co-own biogas, etc. So this is the typical social entrepreneur, somebody who has a vision, who understands a problem we have in society, who empowers others to take action, and then changes the entire system, the entire industry, the entire sector. Another example from our network is Mohammed Yunus, the pioneer of microcredit. You all know what this is about, and it has become a $2 trillion industry across the world. What does he do? He understood the need for capital for people who did not have access. And he understood how to create smart incentive systems that would allow people not only to become agents of their own lives, but also become financial actors and be included in society. Social entrepreneurs are also disruptors. How many of you have used Wikipedia in the last 2 months? How many of you have looked up something in your beautiful, priceless Encyclopedia Britannica in the last 2 months? Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, is a social entrepreneur. He's part of the network, and he's someone that has not only redefined how to gain access to information and how to make it a public good, but he's also redefined how we create information, how we create expertise. And he has redefined who is an expert. So these are all examples of people who are driven by a mission, but are entrepreneurs at heart, and who don't only look at the symptom, but look at the entire system, who understand that it's not enough to feed hungry people, and it's also not enough to teach them how to fish. You need to change the entire fishing industry. What are we learning from our work? Our work in 90 countries of the world with 3,600 social entrepreneurs? Well, first of all, that impact is truly exponential. Profit usually is a 1 + 1 + 1 game, right? If you look at traditional perspectives of how you create value in a company, in an enterprise, it's a pretty, stable growth game. Sometimes if you're lucky and your bet on somebody's currency is successful, it's a 1 + 2 game. But impact can be exponential because impact is more than what you produce within your organization. The most successful social entrepreneurs think about the value they create for society. And actually, I would make the argument that any leading entrepreneur does that, not only social entrepreneurs. They think about impact and they think about what they do beyond what they produce themselves in their own small, sometimes very small, lean organization. Because impact becomes exponential if you think about it from both an ecosystem perspective, but also from the perspective of creating new types of leadership models for social change that go beyond the individual leader and that go beyond, one organization that's going to save the world or one person that's going to save the world. And I just want to give 3 quick examples of that. One of the I find most inspirational examples of a social entrepreneur who's disrupted a market and created a really inspirational leadership model is Jost van der Blok, a Dutch social entrepreneur. Some of you are nodding and you know the model of Buurtzorg. Buurtzorg is now the leader in the market for mobile healthcare in the Netherlands and quickly scaling across other countries. His company has 14,000 people working with them. I don't think he would use the word employees, because what he has created is a model where home care for the elderly or care for those that are sick, is delivered by tiny self-managed, self-organized, and self-controlled teams of nurses who serve their communities. And through this model of thousands and thousands of tiny, small groups of nurses who are ultra competent about what their patients, what their clients, what their community needs, he has exponentially grown the impact from, serving somebody who needs to, have some support in moving from the bed to the toilet, to actually, leveraging resources in the community for those that need it, and rethinking the model. And it's not a surprise that his company, Buurtzorg, has been voted the most highly acclaimed and best employer in the Netherlands for the last 3 years straight. Because nurses love to work there, because they can do what they do best. And no boss is controlling them. So that's just one example. Another example of impact that goes far beyond the organization of one individual is one of our fellows from India, Kailash Satyarthi, who recently won the Peace Nobel Prize with Malala. And you may know his work from the very famous and acclaimed Global March Against Child Labor that started in 1998, so 20 years ago, and was a huge success because what he was able to do is rally an alliance of various actors to come together against child labor. And that included not only NGOs, but it also included companies, it included the big players in the textile industry, and through that work, raise awareness for the topic of child labor, and also actually, make substantive changes in terms of policy. Last point, I think what we can learn, both in our own work and as business leaders, is to always think about surprises and where to look for resources and unlikely alliances. And I just want to stop with one last example of one of our fellows who has understood that unlikely alliances and surprising resources are the key to impact. He's bringing together government, NGOs, local communities, and rats. And what do the rats do? Their superior sense of smell can sniff landmines. And with that technology, he has cleared the entire country of Mozambique from landmines. So look in the places you never thought you'd look. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks for your inspiring impulse. I now wish to change gears in a way, because the two of you are two Europeans.
Yes.
Unconsciously influenced by Aristotle and others. This way of thinking, common good as a way for the individual to flourish in community, maybe the notion of good life, heavily influenced by European thinking. Now I want to switch to other continents. And welcome Paul Kasimu, who is from Kenya. He's the head of human resources, became promoted only recently, as I saw on your on your job title. He looks at the extensive experience in industries in the UK, in Africa, and different continents even, and he's from Safaricom. Safaricom in Kenya, like British Telecom, like German Telecom, a kind of telecommunications provider. And I wouldn't call it an incumbent, but at least a larger organization than this agile social entrepreneur network with Ashoka. I was impressed reading in your self-description that your purpose is to inspire possibilities in others. This is your purpose. And now we'll look forward to get inspired by your perspective. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Let me first start with Africa in terms of, as a business, what operating in there looks like. And I will say VUCA. VUCA in Swahili means jump, but in this case is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. If you talk of predicting the future, sometimes it's more of predicting the day. And you may start with a very calm day, and it could be a legislation that's changed. But speaking to the piece about culture, and especially around the issue of common good, I was looking at some of what are the motivations that businesses have. And if I would bucket African businesses, or East African or Kenya in particular, I would say about half of those will be in what you call shareholder-driven mission. So theirs is about profit, return to shareholder value. They'll be looking at the share price. If you look at the bonuses of CEOs, is based on what have you grown in terms of business. So I think that's a big one. And CEOs are recruited and sacked based on whether they deliver on that. I think it's only in Africa, maybe not anywhere else. But about 50% of businesses will be in that space. We have another group that is about 10%, that is purpose-driven. And we've seen some of those coming through to say we need to establish a purpose. We have values that speak to that purpose. And then they define a culture that drives that purpose. And I will share an example of that in the company I work. But first, if you look at the statistics, and I was looking at the Edelman barometer of trust. If you look at 69% of consumers expect CEOs to focus on repairing trust. 65% of consumers support brands with a purpose. And 63% of shareholders believe companies with a purpose are more profitable. So in the 60s is what we are speaking to. Looking at responsible business, one of the things we've looked at is, in the case of Safaricom, we said purpose before profit, and reputation before revenue. And that's doing ethical business. Now, we are in an ecosystem where perhaps the environment will not necessarily lead, but we say, why can't we lead the way and establish the rules of engagement? We looked at our purpose as transforming lives, and we went into the 3 Ps of purpose, people, and profit in that order. Purpose, people, and profit. And what that has done is we have this clarion call that says, we leave no one behind. And when we look at the ecosystem of our suppliers, so we have about 1,000 contractors who are working with us. We have 150 M-Pesa agents. M-Pesa is the mobile money that was established in 2007. Talk of social good, talk of impact. This is one where people who don't have any bank accounts were enabled to transfer cash in a remote village where transport infrastructure doesn't exist, and saved lives. It also brought dignity in the camps. So there will be some refugee camps where ordinarily a father is supposed to fend for his family. But the dignity of that father will be taken away the moment he was told to queue with his son and wife for the handouts. When M-Pesa came, that money would be wired into his phone, and he would have the dignity of withdrawing that money without saying, I queued for it. So simple things that touch lives in a phenomenal way. We have also extended that. So it's a platform that right now we've also discovered social welfare doesn't exist in Africa as it would be in Europe or elsewhere. You'll find families will need health care. We've established one platform where people can actually take health insurance of as little as 10 US cents to guarantee themselves up of a potential insurance, health insurance. And that for me is something really big. Now, what I'm trying to bring home is the piece where you can be purposeful to be sustainable in the long term. It's not an either or, I think it's a business imperative. And the current thing we're working on at the moment is where we're also looking at agriculture, health and education as the three verticals that this society needs more than ever before. And the question we were looking at, how does our innovation speak to the societal demands in a way that is impactful and makes business sense? So again, a lot of that. Let me speak to what that means to the organization and the framework we're using as a conclusion. In terms of the purpose-driven products that we've had to look at and services, we discovered leadership was the number one thing that needed to lead the way. And where you speak to the purpose, but you role model the same. Because the bigger issues where statements and values are on the wall, but you don't see people walking the talk. I think that was one of the things that we learned heavily. Different partnership models, you can't do this alone. And sometimes you can't leave it to the state. Sometimes the state is absent. And sometimes they don't even, that's not a priority for them. So as a business, I think we've also come in and brought in what you do, a coalition of the willing and purpose-driven organizations to say, how do we drive some of that common good agenda? If you look at Unilever, I think they're talking of sustainable living plan, and that's one of the things that we've seen heavily. Two other things, we've had to define our social impact metrics. What are those drivers for growth and scale? And in our financial report, we also have a sustainable report that we will publish every year as part of our purpose-driven agenda. And then obviously getting staff on board, and culture was a big one, where we said, what does our culture speak in a way that it brings to life our purpose? And we came up with 4 things: the language, the rituals or routines, the symbols of that journey, and the stories. And Africans are known for stories. We tell the stories in a way that is impactful. We just celebrated our 18th birthday, and we saw that as a big one. And finally, the frameworks we use in Africa will be Ubuntu. I am because we are. A child is not born to a family, it's born to the community. A business is not born to the shareholders, it's born to the bigger ecosystem. And the SDGs are also providing an opportunity for us to do purposeful business. That's why I wear the SDG badge with pride. And we've prioritized 9 of those, and we've linked it to personal development plans and individual business objectives. So great stuff there. The point is, sustainable business cannot come in unless you focus on common good. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for this fresh view on common good and how to realize it, and helping us, even in a, let's say, exhausted economies of the West, to have fresh wind to our thinking, not being trapped between individualism and collectivism, but seeing new ways. And to me, you introduced some new way, and some other new way might come from Japan. Peter Drucker was very open to Japanese culture, and his ideas on how Japan works had also a lot of impact on our management literature. And therefore, I'm most proud to welcome Professor Konno. He's a guest professor at Tama Graduate School of Systems Design and Management, Keio University. He's a close collaborator with Professor Nonaka, the Pope in knowledge management, I would say, and Professor Konno. Broad experience in consulting, and also he is leading the Japanese Innovation Network, the Future Center, and interestingly also an organization or initiative called Purpose Engineering. Can purpose be engineered? Let's talk about this in a way. Welcome, let's welcome Professor Konno.
皆さんおはようございます。今日のテーマは人間的な経営についてだと伺いました。
Guten Morgen allerseits, guten Morgen. Ich habe gehört, dass es heute menschliches Management geht.
I don't know how it works, but this is a new Japanese gadget which translates your language into 74 other languages.
And it worked.
It worked.
It worked?
Really well.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I don't, know what
I
he
don't know
said,
what he said.
At least it made sense.
It's a gadget, but in this company, it used to be a software company, but now we are transforming into hardware company. And one of the board members is Mr. Ando, who used to be a Sony's president. So we're still surviving with this kind of a gadget. Today, I'd like to share our different perspective about common good from my little corner. So I'd like to talk about common good and new ethics. Do you think this is for good, common good? Yes, it connects the people. So in Japanese way of thinking, common good is something very practical. In Kenya, it said that the common good is about no one left behind. In Japan, it's kind of a mutual benefit. So that this kind of a gadget works for us, for our common good. Peter Drucker wrote an article in 1971 in HBR titled, "What We Can Learn from Japanese Management." Here he mentioned 4 followings to learn from Japanese management then, many years ago. 1, making effective decisions. 2, harmonizing employment security, HR, with other needs such as productivity, flexibility in labor costs, and acceptance of change in the company. And 3, developing young professional managers. Today, looking back, we feel very different. Japanese companies might have lost all these the characteristics now. So we are trying to revitalize. So last year we invited the Dr. Straub to Tokyo to our conference series called Topos Conference, organized by Professor Ikujiro Nonaka and myself. And the theme was how to revitalize Japanese management. Therefore, we wanted to revisit Drucker. And Peter Drucker called himself, as you know, a social ecologist. The recent book of May and Nonaka is Methodology of Conceptual Imagination, Power to Draw a Big Picture, because it is beyond the strategic imagination of the firm. We need something more than that. So we kind of stopping to talk about strategy as just for the firms, but about conceptual imagination for the society. Business is not able to change or innovate by itself anymore. Nor does the government, the state, the NPOs. So we have to collaborate, as you know. So here we need the common good and purpose, those kind of the ideas. So it is also about, what I mean is the social and historical imagination really matters. And it's also discovery of DNA of Japanese companies, like a Panasonic, then Matsushita, known for its social cause, like a tap water philosophy of benefit. And the recent example may be Hitachi, whose concept is social innovation, and Fujitsu, human-centric society innovation. These large companies, Hitachi is 300,000 companies, are talking themselves social innovation and purpose, etc. So it's kind of the Japanese way of things, but we're trying to revisit and recover. So common good is therefore a fundamental element of innovation for us. Common good is not rule for business or about happiness to promise or pursue, but we mean the common good works as a source of innovation. So one of our tools, as Timo mentioned, is called purpose engineering. Can we engineer purpose? We don't know. It's a soft technology to manage purposes, to create common value, organize and synthesize them, to drive innovation management projects. If you look at the most successful projects, they have good purpose. Sometimes big projects do not have a purpose, I'm sure. And they also have a good relationship between purpose and tools or source, the means or technology sometimes. That's a key element for success. But in innovation projects, sometimes we lack purpose in this manner. So so I'd like to go into the topic of ethics. 2 weeks ago, we held another symposium, and the theme was New Ethics in the Era of Transformation. Transformation is the right word? We found that ethics is becoming a hot topic for innovation. Common good is exercised and realized through practical wisdom of phronesis by Aristotelian Nicomachean ethics. It's not just about content like happiness, but rather metric or norm or context. We are talking about ethics for foundation of innovation, not the traditional corporate ethics or high school ethics. In Japan, it's a very boring curriculum, but about new ethics. Why ethics? First of all, it works for technological innovation. That is sometimes disruptive, such as robots, AI, bioscience, post-human technologies. As Aristotle mentioned implicitly, that technology, or techne, does not have a purpose by itself. It's a human that judges based on common good. That's the ethical part of judgment. So also in social innovation, we need practical wisdom to seek and realize common good. But we should know the foundation of common good. That is a discussion of ethics. So looking back, what Peter Drucker said about Japanese management 50 years ago was all about common good and ethics. So it's the foundation of society and the organizations. So it is good to talk about purpose, but we should ask and discuss, challenge, my 7 minutes to go on, ethics behind. Just a small example. In Japan, we are facing a fast-aging society. The traditional social ethics about how the society should treat seniors are not well fit. It's obsolete because there are too many senior people. We have to seek the new ethical norm. In Japan as well, in the East, ethics is embodied in the daily life practices. We see revival of traditional ethics in China. Confucius Institute is planning to establish 1,000 branches globally by 2020. Among 5 components of Confucianism, politeness is critically important, for instance. It's a social ethical device to maintain the society, at least in the ancient Chinese. Modern Chinese Communist Party is trying to exercise if it works. It's a controversial, but still, it represents how we think about ethics and common good in Eastern philosophy and life. So, when it comes to ethics in Europe, maybe, traditionally, there were 2 types of ethics, Kantian human ethics and utilitarian ethics. They sometimes contradict each other. But swinging between these 2 kind of ethics, like we did today and yesterday, maybe we can find something else beyond that, alternative way of doing and exercising purpose. Because always innovation is embracing the contradicting traits. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Konno. Thank you. It seems the room is fully booked. Common good is obviously attractive. Let's occupy the common good from different angles. I suggest now the floor should be open to questions because we have 20 minutes left for discussion. Strictly prohibited to exceed 60 minutes, as told by Richard Straub. Yes, let's talk about your confusions, insights, questions. You might now be still confused, but hopefully on a higher level. Let's talk about it as you like, please, Professor Kotler.
Yes, I've been working on common good, and
Do we have a mic? Yes, that's coming up.
I've been using the concept of common good as a North Star to aim at. And in some cases, it's very simple to say a certain policy is for the common good. If women had more rights and should have more rights, it's for the common good. There are issues that I'm troubled by. For example, in the United States, we have very poor policy about guns. And there's one side that will say it's for the common good to let people freely have a gun. And the other side will say that it's awful, that's not for the common good. It's hard to figure out because the common good means counting the number of people who are benefited versus disbenefited by the policy. And another one that comes up with is with abortion rights. There's a side that believes women should not have abortion rights. So there's a lot of issues. The economists normally solve the problem by saying, if those who were disbenefited by something are compensated by those who are benefited, left, in other words, in the same position, not worse off anymore, then it's a good policy. If the majority is benefited and the minority is disbenefited but compensated, it's fine. And that's the economist's answer to that issue. But I wondered if other people have seen difficult issues in terms of common good and where we should come out on those issues.
It's a question to whole or to anybody in specific?
Should we collect some questions, maybe?
Just to finish, is it a general question to the whole group?
Well, if someone has some experiences with an issue,
Okay, then we can. Okay.
where it came up dynamically, where some group said, this is not for the common good to do that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah.
Maybe some more to collect first. There's a lady in the middle.
Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion and presentations. Beata Kołecka, I'm from the European Commission. I'd like to ask you how you see the role of public actors, so state, but not only state, public structures in supporting organizations, well, which have a common good as their purpose. And second question, as there are different definitions of what is common good, does it make more difficult international cooperation and operation internationally by organizations, by these common good-oriented businesses or social businesses?
Okay, thank you. Most complex, very complex, interesting, intriguing question. Maybe one last, then we have three, and then we start first round of.
Yes. Hi,
Yes.
My name's Afosa. This question is more for Paul, but anyone else can answer. I found that it's very difficult to do common good stuff without profits. How does the society manage the fact that Safaricom is a successful and profitable company? Do you get pushback from either the government or people saying you're exploiting, even though you're providing what I think is tremendous value?
Okay, thank you. That we start. Anybody who wants to start with maybe Philip Kotler's question about the difficulty to do this calculation, maybe, or role of state? Who wants to start first?
I mean, maybe I can offer a reflection on your question. This is less from our client, well, it is from our client work, but also from the fact that we have offices in many countries, right? I think one of the points you made is that common good is probably something that evolves over time. You know, I would agree with that. Hundreds of years ago, probably there was a common good to flogging criminals publicly and hanging them because it's a deterrent. Today we don't do that anymore, so that has changed. Things we practically struggle with in terms of defining common good is, I think, for many of our clients, diversity is a common good. Diversity in terms of gender, diversity in terms of sexual orientation. And we do a lot of business in societies that have different perspectives on this, right? In the Middle East, in Africa, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a bit of a daily struggle of saying we as a global company and with the work for our clients, we are advocates of diversity in that sense, while at the same time serving clients that might have a different viewpoints. There's no silver bullet in this, but we usually start the engagement in such places with a code of ethics that we discuss with clients and the work that we do in order to sort of manage expectations up front in the relationships we want to build. That is usually a give and take. Those code of ethics evolve over time, but that's just a practical application of how to deal with something, I think, that you try to outline. Does that make sense?
Microphone, please.
The real problem is there are some groups who believe that they know what the common good is, and we know, those of us who are wiser, that that is not common good. Slavery in the South of the United States was for the common good of the Southerners. They really believed it. They even had faked a whole self-recital on why it was okay. So the real problem that we have to address eventually is how do you attack a group that believes so firmly in something, and how do you destabilize their beliefs and so on? That's just another aspect of it, because if we're not, now maybe, is it a matter of ethics? We say your ethics are terrible. I mean, to believe in that kind of thing. And maybe it's all about ethical systems competing. Right. I don't know.
May I? Yeah. Well, I'm trying to answer these questions as well. Of course, there are different versions of common good, of course, by philosophically, of course, as you said, and by the locations, regions. Like Kenya and Japan have different context in terms of difference of common good. This is one example. This is someone's case, I forgot. But if you're a group of rich men in the United States, heavily invested in the total perfect cancer drug, should we share to everyone in the world? It's a conflict in between the utilitarian, meaning not the number, but money utilitarian, because IP should go to the rich man, or IP should go to everyone. It's the conflict between utilitarian and human Kantian ethics. How do we do this? This is one Japanese company called Eisai. They're Eisai, known for the drug for Alzheimer, dementia. And they also have developed this drug for I forgot the name, but they cure your the heavy disease bitten by mosquitoes. And they try to market in poor places like in part of India. But they said this is a business. Why? And they said it's a business. They priced this drug 0 rupees. How can it be business? They said even if they priced it the 0 rupee, they eventually get some reputations and branding, as Paul said, and return over time, at the same time, globally, because they could work with WHO. So it's an ecosystem. So public institution should have this kind of a network or ecosystem, not by own, to using, maybe Ashoka, to try to mitigate the conflict between the common good systems. That's the small answer, maybe. I don't want to challenge a marketing guru.
Yes. Wait, please hold on a second, because we have still open issues.
Yep.
Marie, you want to?
Let me take the one at the end. And yes, there's a piece about if you're common good, why do you make such profits? So even profitability, is it decent? What is the level of profit that is right? And you'll find a lot of different stakeholders with different interests. So consumers will say, if you're making too much profit, it means you're overcharging us, reduce your price rates. Of course, profit is a function of many things. If you look at suppliers, they'll say your margins are too thin, that is why you're squeezing us out of it. Employees will also say, hey, how much are you paying us in bonus? So I think at the end of the day is to say, what are the values that drive the way you do business? And what are the rules of engagement? Because again, we are also saying, hold us to the same. It's not just saying do it right, but we will also want to do it. Profit comes as an end, not the means of why we do business. And I think if you look at the issue of freedom, autonomy, sociability, where you're looking at the impact in society, we believe when we take others and we grow, for instance, we've said, we have purpose to say business-led, female-led businesses will be a priority in the way we engage with subcontractors. And of course, they will need to meet a minimum threshold, but then we'll work with them. And I think as a result of some of those initiatives that we've undertaken, people are saying, actually impacting the society much more than we thought. And there is less so of profitability at the end. Of course, we also publish how much we pay our executives, and including our internal equity to say, is there a relational kind of equity between senior management and the lowest person in the organization? I think when you do that, then people will say, this is a values-driven, purpose-led organization.
Maybe I can speak a little bit to this question as well from the perspective of sort of the creativity that we're seeing in some of our social entrepreneurs who are constantly in this struggle of asking the question, for whom is this good, right? And who am I taking on the way? And what we're seeing is that typically those social entrepreneurs who understand how to bring others on board, who create movements, will be the ones who will be more successful in bringing their impact to the world. And now you can make the argument that hopefully this movement is one that is of an empowered nature. So you're not manipulating people to become part of that movement, but you're inviting them to become part of the solution. And to me, that's a very strong argument when I see movement building of this type, that here is someone building towards the good of all, right? So that's just one thought for that. On the question of profit versus impact, I think just wanted to share two examples from our network. One is the Arend Eye Care Hospital that some of you may be familiar with, which has a really interesting, innovative pricing model. They've developed a very low-cost way of, solving, a very common and easily solvable eye problem by inserting lenses into the eye. They understood that if they work at scale, they will be able to produce very cheaply, and if they have a pricing model that allows those that don't have access to capital to, get that kind of service for free or for very, very low price, but that they're asking those that can pay to pay, they will actually be extremely successful and sustainable in their operations. So that's just one example. And the other one, also from the healthcare sector, is again around this question of alliance building that to me is, I find one of the most important pieces of insight from this work. It's an organization called Esperare who understood that in particular with diseases that are either rare, orphan diseases, or are serving populations that don't have the means to pay, or are living in countries where the state doesn't have the means to pay, they will have to come up with more creative models of incentivizing corporations to, do research on these diseases. And basically what they're doing is they're working with companies to open source some of the sort of molecules and some of the technology and the insights and the research as a way to get others on board and form alliances to create drugs that address these issues. And this has been super successful. They've launched 2 drugs in spaces where everyone thought it was completely impossible to create something that's profitable. And I think, to me, those are 2 things. And just one point on the public, on the question of the public, the state, and sort of the public arena. Our work is very much focused on building what we call ecosystems for change makers, because we understand that in this world, we're not going to thrive unless as many people as possible can be part of the change. And in order for them to be able to be part of the change, not only do we need to change mindsets in people and empower them to be these change makers, but we also need to remove barriers to that. And what are those barriers? Well, typically, it's questions like, how do I create an association? How do I create a company? How do I, how is the culture around me supporting me to do the crazy things that I want to do to save the world? And so building those ecosystems and doing that with governments is a key to, I believe, the success of, and the ability as societies to solve problems. So governments and public servants and public administration have a huge role to play to remove those barriers and ensure that there's these ecosystems for people to thrive.
I guess we have 5 minutes left. We can take one last round of short questions.
Yes. Thank you to the panel for a fantastic discussion so far. I have a question for Marie. Obviously, Ashoka has been quite instrumental in this movement for social entrepreneurship. Perhaps maybe the organization has been too successful, because I find the label social entrepreneurship has become quite common. I look at my LinkedIn contacts, and I sometimes feel that every other person is a social entrepreneur.
Excellent.
And I think sometimes people start off with a mission of making us the most money that they possibly can. It doesn't work out, and they say, well, I'm a social entrepreneur.
Wow. Okay.
How do you avoid this trap of the movement being essentially hijacked? And then the consequence of that, obviously, it will have some sort of negative connotation to your mission of common good. Yeah.
Okay, let's collect. If there are 2 left. You first, to 2 of you.
Yes. The question is to Professor Konno. It's good to hear about a Japanese management story. And so Japanese was so famous in 1970s regarding their culture about taking care of the employees. And if we consider that was common good to employees, but that was really heavily being challenged in the past 20 years. So just like to understand from Professor Konno's perspective, you shared about the social common good initiative in a big company in Japan, and how this new initiative can reshape the management culture in Japan.
Thank you. This is one last.
Okay.
Please.
Maybe
No.
Please,
Let's have this question and then have a very short round of answering.
Nicholas Kimle, I moved 7 years, immigrated in the States from Austria. We are all using common good already extensively, and I think we should see the paradigm shift is happening. This year, one of the biggest open source companies or platforms is bought profitably with $7.5 billion to Microsoft, and they were 10 years against that. And the interesting thing is, all of that is happening tremendously because 28 million people working on 85 million projects today. We have no clue what is coming, and all of that is really impacting, but we don't know that. I was going to my programmers, and we use from Debian the next version of open source software on the servers, and it is called Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is an unbelievable story. It's an open source with a message behind, and it's an English company for common good. We all use that. I think
Could you please focus on the question, because
the question is how we can transform and how we can impact the knowledge that's already happening, because it's going on.
It goes to
the panel.
To the panel. Okay, Looking at this screen, this terrible screen, clockwise, backwards. running. Short answers?
Yeah, I can say I'm totally not worried about people calling themselves social entrepreneurs and hijacking the movement, because honestly, I believe, as the more people think of themselves as giving back to society, the better for all of us. And if some of them don't do it well, that's sort of part of what happens. So I'm relaxed about that.
One for you.
I just
Okay, responding to Japanese management question. As we all say now, success is a mother of failure. Yeah, because we are too good in 1970s and 80s. So there are two things happening. We probably forgot our essence of the management and pursued American management. That was failure, maybe. So we are, well, just joking. So we are tracking back our route and re-establish. And then what happened was we are fumbling in 1990s whether we should go post-industrial model or we should stay manufacturing model. And while we're doing that, Koreans and Chinese companies are very good at focusing one direction strongly, so we kind of lost middle of nowhere. So we have learned that. So we tried to restructuring that. That was the short answer.
I guess even the most result-driven midwife at some point has to say, that's it. I'm not prepared to summarize this discussion. I'm unable to summarize. But at least before we go off, so thank you. Maybe one provocation for lunch. I would like to disagree with you, Professor Kotler, when you said the definition of common good is counting majority versus minority. As being a German, inherited a culture of German history where the tyranny of the masses brought us to the misery of the 20th century. I would argue this is one definition, but there are a number of other definitions saying common good is not just a calculation between majority and minority, but a different category of the collective well-being, which transcends individual gains. And in the history of philosophy, we have at least three different versions of what common good could mean. Good intentions, the sum of statistics, or as, by the way, the Pope uses the term common good 28 times in his last encyclica, 28 times. The Catholic Church has a notion saying common good is the boundary condition to take on your own responsibility, autonomously, the destiny of your life. It's a boundary condition. It's an enabling condition. A necessity for being, like Kant would say. Therefore, we have a multitude of common good definitions, not only different European philosophies, but also different continents. And maybe with this kind of opening your minds, our minds, we have to close anyhow now, for the sake of being on time. And if it's true that language matters, common good is a term which brings people from different continents together, and we can't skip this term. It's not possible to suspend and dismiss the notion of common good. We all are invited to come up with creative ideas. And maybe a last thought, what Peter Drucker would have said. He used the term common good only on rare occasions. He's very conscious. He used the term public good, wealth, commonwealth. But going back to his very early work on Friedrich Joseph Stahl, he came up with the saying, it's always about a bearable society even. They use the term bearable, between continuity and change, balancing continuity and change. And this might be the Drucker thought on the common good, balancing the continuity of change, not just being innovative for the sake of innovation, but use the term of balancing. And maybe with this sort of balancing, I say thank you to my distinguished colleagues at this panel, and big applause for all of them. Thanks a lot.